Great. I think this is a good time for us to get started. There might still be one or two people arriving, but let's get going. So, welcome to all of you to the 2026 Lauren Leclercio Lecture. I'm Prof. Petrus de Vries from the Division of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry, and I'm a member of the Social Responsiveness Committee in the Department of Psychiatry at the University of Cape Town. And I'm going to start by giving you just a little bit of background about the lecture, where it came from, etc. And then I will introduce our speaker today. And then after his talk, there will be chance for questions and discussions. And Fatima Ismail, the chair of the committee, will wrap things up at the end for us today. So please keep your questions till the end. Keep yourself mute, your video off until that time, and then we will encourage you to join us in conversations. So some of you may know, but I think it's always helpful for our main annual lecture in the Social Responsiveness Committee just to say something about the lecture and where it comes from. We introduced this, we started this in 2018 as a lecture as part of our social responsiveness portfolio. And we deliberately set out to look for a clinician or an applied scientist who really exemplifies the spirit of socially responsive and community-based research. We have many challenges in our continent and in our country, and we want to make sure that we are socially mindful and responsive to the needs of the communities we're trying to serve. So why did we call it the Lauren Leclercio Lecture? Lauren was a mom, a wife, a businesswoman. In fact, she was a model, a beautiful woman when she was a student. And she was a master's student at UCT and neuropsychologist by training. And she was a PhD student with us as well. She worked on tuberous sclerosis complex, which is a rare genetic disorder. And she was an incredible champion for working in collaboration with people and families who have lived expertise of whatever the condition is that one works on. And Lauren was a real believer in the power of research to transform communities. She very sadly passed away in January 2018 after a short battle with cancer, and left a husband and two beautiful kids and all the things that she had contributed to. And so in honor of her work and really as a symbol of our desire to be socially responsive in everything we do, we decided to create this annual lecture in her honor and using her name. So here, for those of you who didn't know Lauren, here you can see her in different guises and places and positions. And she was really a remarkable woman, and we still remember and think of her contributions, and we still acknowledge the impact that she had, even in her short academic career. So I delivered the first Lauren Leclercio lecture, and we tried then to alternate it between somebody locally and somebody internationally. So we had Mareta de Jonge from the Netherlands in 2019, then Prof. Lebo Moletsane from KwaZulu-Natal, then Lionel Green Thompson, our Dean in the Faculty of Health Sciences, Liz Pellicano from London the following year, Prof. Linda Tron, who's an expert in adolescent resilience in African contexts in 2023, Anna Janssen, a pediatric neurologist from Belgium in 2024. And last year we had our own Prof. Sharon Klenkies, who's an intellectual disabilities expert. And so I'm going to stop my screen and ask our presenter for today to share his screen while I introduce him. So we're really happy to have as our presenter today, Professor Bruno Falissard. Bruno trained in fact, mathematics and physics in his early years. And Bruno, if you just want to go to your first slide. There we go, perfect. And then he trained in medicine, in child and adolescent psychiatry, a PhD in epidemiology and related topics. And he runs a large epidemiology and kind of public health related research team and program in Paris. Apart from Bruno's academic research work, I've also known him and worked with him through IACAPAP, the International Association for Child and Adolescent Psychiatrists and Allied Professions. Bruno was the president for some time, and he and I have also worked together on the Helmut Remschmidt Research Capacity Building Program. So academia, research capacity building, mentoring, etc. I really think of Bruno as quite a Renaissance man or a polymath, because other than all these things, he's also a good cook. He knows a lot about wine and wine drinking. Well, no, that doesn't sound so good, Bruno. He's a good wine connoisseur. And just when you think he's maybe a little bit passive as a person, he's also an ultra trail runner. So Bruno might remember he actually met Lauren. He actually worked with her in 2017 when we had the regional INSAR and meeting here. And so it's really great for us to invite Bruno to deliver this year's Lauren Ecclesio lecture on this very important and interesting topic on, is decolonizing psychiatry a socially responsive thing to do? Bruno, thank you, and I hand over to you.
Thank you, Petrus. Thank you indeed for this introduction and to allow me to discuss about this topic. First, my disclosure. Obviously, I am French, and because of that, you know that my country has a very long history of colonialism, and of course, I may be biased because of that. Because colonialism deals with sociology, anthropology, I will have to speak about that, but I am not a sociologist nor an anthropologist, and so this will not be very professional nor very scientific, but I think that in child and adolescent psychiatry we have to open our mind to other culture, other discipline. This is a good part of our job, and so let it be. And in addition, I am consultant in statistics for most pharmaceutical firms, but this is not the point with today's presentation. Now, my plan, first, I will obviously say that there is a child and adolescent psychiatric colonialism, but there is also a criticism of this concept of colonialism. And we will have to see this tension between pro and cons, and we will use some philosophical and anthropological perspective for that. But at the end, and this will be the most important, we will broaden the scope, considering that, of course, there is a child and adolescent psychiatric colonialism that affect particularly countries that have been colonialized in the past, but there is also some kind of methodological colonialism and epistemological colonialism that is much more important on one point of view because it concerns a huge number of countries. Now, I begin by the fact that indeed child and adolescent psychiatric colonialism does exist, and I will begin by that. I stopped my outpatient clinical practice 2 years ago, and so during more than 30 years, I had an outpatient clinical activity in the north of Paris, very close to a suburb where there are a lot of migrants from Africa. And so I had a patient, mother and young children like that. And one day, I realized that when I speak to a mother like that, I speak more loudly. And I say to myself, but why am I shouting? There is no reason to speak loudly. So why am I doing that? And I realized that because she was black and in a typical cultural dress, unconsciously, I felt that she didn't understand me. And because of that, I was speaking more loudly because when you speak to somebody that do not understand you, you speak more loudly. But this was, of course, totally unconscious, totally unconscious. And you see, even within myself, there is some kind of colonialism in my unconscious. So that's life. And so now I know that I have to deal with that. And indeed, there is a huge psychiatric literature about psychiatric colonialism in general, that is in adult psychiatry. The work of Frantz Fanon is likely to be the first one that has been very well known. He was a psychiatrist, obviously coming from an overseas French territory, and he struggled a lot against colonialism during his short life because he died from lymphoma while he was a little bit below 40. And so he said that psychiatry for colonialists were some kind of alibi, saying that because colonized people are different, this difference is in fact a pathology, and we have to treat it with some kind of psychiatry. And psychiatry indeed had an impact on mental health of colonized people. First, because of colonialism, there was an injunction to change the way people were living, and so because of that, a loss of identity. And because of this loss of identity, some kind of internalized racism, that is because I have to change, because before I was not a good person, and now because of the colonial people, I have to change and to become a better person, which is, of course, something very violent. And in addition, there was no real evidence that European psychiatric practices were relevant in a colonial context. And because of that, some local practices have disappeared, and it is absolutely a problem. This happened also in child and adolescent psychiatry. The arguments are very similar. But perhaps even more acute in the context of children and adolescents. Why? Because in some culture, in some country, a kid that ran during the class, this is just normal, because this is the way that children are doing. And in fact, even in Occidental country, perhaps you know that there are different schools, Freinet school, Montessori, where children can run and have not necessarily to sit on a chair and to listen to the teacher. But if you are in a very Occidental country, you will say, oh, he's running during the classroom, he is hyperactive, he has ADHD. No, this is not a deviance, this is just a cultural divergence. Norm of parenting too, you know that in all countries there are different norms of parenting, and this is not because you are in an Occidental country with your norms that these norms are relevant in another context. And more surprisingly, you know at the moment that there is a concept of global mental health that is supposed to be very open to the whole planet, etc. But even the concept of global mental health sometimes has some kind of colonialized flavor. And here is a paper that you can read about that. And this is the case for WHO MHCAP, the mental health cap. This is an algorithm in order to treat patients when you have no medical resource. So that can be adapted to a low and middle income country. But when you look at the treatment of ADHD, first you have family support, psychological treatment, blah, 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 blah. But if this treatment have failed and the child has a diagnosis of ADHD and is at least 6 years old, then you have to refer to a specialist for methylphenidate. But in most low and middle income country, you have no psychological treatment, at least no evidence-based psychological treatment for most of the children that have ADHD. And so you will be exactly in this situation, and the only solution that you will have is to prescribe pills. And because of that, global mental health is possibly a situation where many, many children will have medication, and medication, in a way, is some kind of Occidental way of treating ADHD. Perhaps in this country, there is a particular way to deal with this type of disorder, if it is a disorder. But we will come back to that in a few moments. Okay. So, child and adolescent psychiatric colonialism does exist, but there are criticisms too against this concept of colonialism. Indeed, some people say, okay, you in South Africa, like me in France, we have amygdala, a prefrontal cortex, and we have dopamine. And so we are similar. And in addition, there are CBT, cognitive and behavioral therapy in South Africa. And when you have a panic attack in South Africa, you can use CBT to deal with this patient. And this is the same with OCD. And it works. And this is exactly the same with EMDR. It works in PTSD, whether you are in South Africa or in France. And it is the same for antipsychotics in schizophrenia, stimulants in ADHD, etc., etc. And so there are universal advances in psychiatry and in child and adolescent psychiatry. And so saying that there is only colonialism, some people will say, no, 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 no. And in fact, this is a controversy that does exist in medicine too. For instance, this is a paper published in 2023 that says that because of the Occidental countries, and there has been tobacco, soda, hamburgers in all colonized countries with an epidemic of obesity, and this is true. We Occidental people have done experiments on local population with mustard gas, a poison, and we have killed many people in colonized country because of these experiments. We have forced sterilization. We did medical research on disease that affect Occidental people and not necessarily people in this local country, etc., etc. And so because of medicine, we did something that was really a disaster. But on the other way, there are antibiotics, there are vaccines, there is asepsia, and asepsia, if you do a surgery, you need to wash hands before, whether you are in South Africa or you are in Paris. And asepsia, it has been found by Occidental country. And this is the same with intensive care. If you have a child with a dehydration, you have to infuse fluids, whether you are in South Africa or in Paris. And so there is some kind of universality in medicine. And this is a paper in the Lancet a couple of decades ago, which said that Western medicine makes it good to be alive. So you see there is the tension, obviously. On one side, colonialism does exist and it has been a disaster. On the other side, there is some kind of universalism too in medicine and in child and adolescent psychiatry. And so we have to find a way to deal with this tension. And because of that, we are going to consider some philosophical and anthropological perspective. So, first, it is likely to be one of the first authors that really dealt with this question. It is Arthur Kleinman. He was a psychiatrist, and indeed did work in anthropology. And he said that, in fact, in English, and this is true in English, but this is not true in French. I don't know if it is the case in the many languages that you have in South Africa, but you speak English anyway. You know that in English you have disease, illness, and sickness. And these three words are dealing with the same thing, but not in the same way. Disease, you are doing with the medical term, dealing with dopamine, genetics, inflammation. While illness, this is about the patient's feeling. What is the meanings of this disorder for him or for her? What is the impact of this disorder on his life? And sickness, this is the society point of view with stigma, care, etc. And this is interesting because in child and adolescent psychiatry, if you consider ADHD or other neurodevelopmental disorder, and you say neurodevelopmental disorder, you are in the disease context because you are dealing with neurodevelopment. But today, when I don't know if it is the case in your country, but today, many patients, many adolescents come for the consultation and they say, okay, hello, I am ADHD, I am ASD, I am ASD. But when they say that, me as a physician, I understand that he says that he has a disease. No, he says that he has an illness, because saying I am ASD, this is his feeling about himself. This is some kind of identity and not necessarily related to genetics or inflammation. And this is the same when a teacher said to the parents, oh, be careful, your kid is likely to have ADHD. This is not about the disease because the teacher is not a physician or a nurse. This is about the sickness. The teacher just say, oh, your kid is moving a lot. He has attention problem. He has ADHD. But this is his societal point of view. And so you can see that the same word, ADHD, ASD, can be considered differently even within a unique country. And this is funny. In Japan, a couple of years ago, they decided, because there was supposedly, and it was true, some kind of stigma with schizophrenia. They say we are going to change schizophrenia, that was Saishin Bunretsu Bio, mind split disease, and they change the word using the new concept of Togo Shicho Sho, that is integration disorder. So the wording of schizophrenia changed, and it had an impact on how the society considered schizophrenia. After, you have Ian Hacking, a philosopher, a Canadian philosopher, that explains that categories, child and adolescent psychiatric categories, they are alive. They are not fixed entities. And he developed the concept of looping effect. What does it mean? It means that he developed that in particular for multiple personality disorder. But you can consider it also with ADHD or ASD. For instance, ASD is in the DSM-5. And so it is the disease, the term we use as physicians. So the term ASD, autism, enter into the society, and the society catch the wording, autism, and develop something new, that is an identity of being an autist. And suddenly, I'm sure you had that also in South Africa, suddenly you have many people that are supposed to be autist. Greta Thunberg, for instance, said, I am Asperger. For me as a physician, I am a little bit embarrassed, but she says that. So she says that I am ASD, and so the concept of ASD has changed, and because the concept of ASD has changed, the way physicians see ASD change again. This is a loop between physician, disease, society, physician, disease, society, etc., etc. Similarly, Joel Paris, a psychiatrist that is also a philosopher, has a very interesting consideration. It is a Canadian too. He says that, in fact, in psychiatry, there are symptoms pool. And within this pool, according to culture, according to centuries, the symptoms are creating some disease with a certain name or some other disease. For instance, within the pool, there is anxiety. Anxiety, it is about fear, and it is likely to be stable. 2000 years ago, people had anxiety. In South Africa, there is anxiety. In France, there is anxiety. Human beings have anxiety sometimes. But the concept of non-suicidal self-injury, this is not like that. This is just a way within a culture, people use anxiety to express themselves and to show a clinical picture of what they are. And so you see there is some kind of relationship between some core symptoms and some disorder. The core symptoms are universal, but the disorder can vary from a culture and another culture, and this can correspond to some kind of contagion. And with non-suicidal self-injury, you surely know that within these years, we have some kind of an epidemic. And because of all that, you know also that there has been some transcultural psychiatry. But unfortunately, this is quite a mess, because behind transcultural psychiatry, you have very, very, very different entities. You have ethnopsychiatry, you have medical anthropology, you have cultural psychiatry, you have decolonial, post-colonial psychiatry, etc., which makes that when you use transcultural psychiatry, this is not sure what you use really, and this has an impact on the clinic, because what you will do as a physician or a nurse will be different. Okay, so now I propose to broaden the scope and first to consider some kind of methodological imperialism, some methodological colonialism. I'm sure you know what is evidence-based medicine, and you know the pyramid of level of evidence, from case reports to randomized control trial and meta-analysis. Okay, this is supposed to be true. And I will say that EBM is fine. I have no problem with that. Evidence-based medicine is interesting. Randomized control trials are interesting. But perhaps you don't know that there is no evidence of the level of evidence. People say that the level of evidence are the pyramid and RCT are better than case reports, but there is no scientific evidence of that. I show you two papers, two philosophical papers of epistemology that deal with this question, and in fact this is absurd. This is just a tradition. This is just a tradition, a good tradition, in particular in cardiology, in cancerology, in HIV. Randomized control trial and EBM have been very, very efficient, but sometimes this pyramid of evidence is not necessarily adapted, and in particular, in different countries, this is not sure that the same pyramid of evidence has to be used because of the question of sustainability. If we ask that all treatment provided in South Africa have to be studied by the randomized control trial, this is not sustainable. This is just impossible. And so, and I know Petrus likes this concept of implementation research, which is not the same as evidence-based medicine. This is another way to consider another evidence-based medicine. And in addition, in child adolescent psychiatry, we have a lot of non-pharmacological treatments, and it is not sure at all that the pyramid of evidence that is adapted to medication is also relevant for non-pharmacological treatment. Why? Because of the therapist effect. With many medication, the therapist effect is negligible against the drug, and the patient effect is negligible against the disease. In psychiatry and in child and adolescent psychiatry, this is not true, and there are many data about that. And so there is some kind of methodological imperialism of evidence-based medicine. Now, epistemological imperialism, this is a little bit more tricky, but I think this is more important. You will see why. First, and this is Alfred Whitehead, a mathematician and philosopher of the beginning of the 20th century in England. And he said in two books that something happened during the 17th century in Occidental country. Philosopher, scientists, Galileo, Descartes, Newton, big words, big names, they say that they postulated, but you will see that for you, this postulate seems really obvious. They said that nature is made of matter. Okay. Matter is made of isolated entities in space and time. That is, matter is made of atoms that are isolated entities in space and time. And they interact between each other with electricity, with gravity. And these entities interact also with me as a scientist that observe reality. This is called the simple location principle. That is, matter is made of isolated entities in space and time that interact between each other. And this simple location principle is at the basis of what we call natural science. And of course, natural science, you have physics, chemistry, biology, etc. Very efficient. And so you see that we have atoms, and in South Africa, and in France, and in Brazil, and in China, you have the same atoms. This is universal. And after, these atoms are designing cells with a nucleus, ribosome, etc., etc. And this is true in South Africa, and this is true in the United States of America. This is universal. And these cells are designing organs. You have kidneys, you have lung, you have a heart, you have muscles, you have bones, like me. This is universal. And after, you have human beings that interact when they speak, and this is true in South Africa, this is true in France too, this is universal. And so that's life. We are like that. Our planet, all the universe is like that. Okay, but what about our interiority? Because in fact, human beings have an interiority. And this is an anthropologist who shows that, Philippe Descola. He shows that all around the planet, all human beings, they know that they have a body with bones, muscles, like animals, but within ourselves, we have also something that we call a soul, an interiority, etc. And even if we all have an interiority, according to country, it is a relationship between physicality and interiority between human beings and other animals that are different, and because of that you have naturalism, animism, totemism, analogism, etc. Anyway, the question now is the simple location principle compatible with interiority? And the answer is no. No, and I just mentioned these words from supposedly Victor Hugo. He had a daughter who died when she was young, and so he was grieving, and he said, "My daughter, you are no longer where you were, but you are everywhere where I am." And unfortunately, I am sure you experienced that one day. When you have something that you love a lot and this person disappears, in fact, he or she disappears, but she is still inside you. He or she is not separated from you. And this is exactly the same in a romantic relationship. When you love somebody, you know that, in fact, you are so close that my wife is a little bit within myself, and I'm sure that I am within herself. And this is the same in a therapeutic relationship. When you follow a patient during weeks, months, years, in fact, and you know that transferency, countertransferency, even therapeutic alliance are related with that. Where we are within the patient and the patient is within ourselves. And so there is no simple location principle with interiority. And this is particularly relevant in psychiatry and in child and adolescent psychiatry. And so because of that, if we use only natural sciences in child and adolescent psychiatry, we throw the baby out of the bath, because in psychiatry we are dealing with interiority, and interiority does not work with the simple location principle, but natural science impose the simple location principle. So natural science cannot work properly with psychiatry. They can help. They can find things that are interesting, medication, neuroscientific advance, no problem. But they cannot say that they can grasp the whole picture of psychiatry. And so, to conclude, to engage in the conclusion, there is another kind of neocolonialism, that is a methodological and an epistemological neocolonialism. Because of that, we have everywhere some kind of objectivity. Objectivity is supposed to be fine, but in fact, with objectivity, you consider that your patients are object, and they are not object, they are subject. You can't consider the brain of your patient, and you can study the brain with MRI, etc. You will do objective scientific work, and this is fine. But you have also to consider that your patient is a subject, and if you do science with that, it will not be by natural sciences. And so there is some kind of domination of medical, of natural science episteme on psychiatric research. And we don't even see it. And this has important clinical consequences. For instance, I mentioned to you, when we are with the patient, we are involved with the patient. And it is very difficult to do science with that, because it is not related to the principle of simple location. So for many scientists, this is nothing. Being involved with the patient, this is just care. This is not science. This is not medicine. This is not good science. Another curiosity, you know that we do clinical interviews with symptoms, diagnosis, treatment, and we do therapy session. And for many people, the clinical interview is very different from the therapy session, while in fact, all clinical interviews have to be a little bit a therapy session. And when a psychiatrist do a therapy, there is always some kind of clinical interview within the therapy session. But we have to split clinical interview and therapy session, because clinical interview come from the natural science and therapy session, no. We say patient with autism. Patient with autism. No, patients are autist. This is themselves that are autist. If we say patient with autism, we say that there is a disorder that affects themselves. And this is a consequence of this methodological and epistemological, etc. So, and to end, there is also the question of marginalization of spirituality. You know that in Occidental medicine, spirituality is never mentioned in scientific papers, or quite never mentioned. While in Asia, for instance, my good colleague at Petrusno, Daniel Fung, told me one day, oh, in France, you have a bio-psycho-social model. In Singapore, we have a bio-psycho-social spiritual model. And I think he's right. So this is my last slide. In conclusion, there is indeed a child and adolescent psychiatric colonialism. There is what is visible, going from Frantz Fanon and all following authors. There is also what we don't see. And there is also an invisible colonialism that is more a methodological and an epistemological colonialism. And we have to know that to be able to get rid of this kind of imperialism, and after to be able to do a balance between what natural science that are universal can learn us on how to treat our patient in a local cultural context, and to put that in balance with our local cultural specificity. and I thank you for your attention.